When Ryan finally opened the hidden door beneath the old mansion, he expected rot, dust, maybe a stray raccoon. He didn't expect Atlas to freeze, stare into the darkness, and refuse to move. And he definitely didn't expect to find his father's handwriting on a document that someone had tried to bury for 30 years. What followed wasn't a home renovation. It was a war. And the first soldier to step forward was a dog who seemed to know the truth long before any human dared to look. Ryan Walker had never believed in lucky breaks, not after the explosion in Helmand that crushed his left leg, not after the doctors told him he'd never run again, and certainly not when the county auctioneer slammed the gavel on his 5-cent bid for the abandoned Briarwood estate. 5 cents and a signature. That was all it took to inherit a century of dust and silence. But the moment he and Atlas stepped out of the truck, something shifted. The wind felt colder than it should have. The house, hunched beneath a canopy of oaks, didn't look abandoned. It looked like it was holding its breath. Atlas stood rigid beside him, muscles tight beneath his thick coat. The German shepherd's ears flicked once, then locked forward like twin antennas. Ryan clicked his tongue, a sound he'd used on deployment. Atlas didn't move. That was the first warning. The front porch groaned under Ryan's weight, but the wood wasn't rotten. The brass key the county clerk gave him slid into the lock too easily, like the door had been opened recently. When the hinges swung in a smooth arc instead of a rusty shriek, Ryan's pulse skipped. Atlas let out a low, controlled growl. Not fear, a message. Inside, the air smelled of old stone and something faintly metallic. Light filtered through cracked glass, washing the foyer in fractured reflections. A staircase curled upward into darkness, too pristine for a house that should have been left untouched for 40 years. Then Ryan saw it. The banister, dust-free. Not a speck. Someone had been here. Atlas stepped in slowly, nose close to the floor, scanning in the slow, methodical movements he'd learned clearing rooms in war zones. Ryan followed, each step measured. The living room was clean. Not tidy, not staged. Clean. The stone hearth looked recently swept. A single mug sat upside down on the counter as if drying. And in the kitchen, the burner was still warm. Ryan hovered his palm over it. Yes, definitely warm. His chest tightened. This house wasn't abandoned, it was interrupted. Atlas froze in the hallway. His tail straightened, the way it used to moments before Ryan's unit hit the breach. He pressed his paw against a section of wall where the wallpaper didn't quite line up. Ryan knelt. The plaster felt newer, the paint slightly duller. He tapped once. The hollow echo chilled him. Someone patched this wall recently. Atlas growled again, deeper this time. He stepped in front of Ryan, blocking the hallway with his body as if saying not yet. Ryan set his gear in the living room, unrolled his sleeping bag near the cold hearth, and kept a flashlight within reach. Atlas lay down, but his head never touched the floor. His eyes stayed on the hallway, breathing steady, controlled, always listening. Night crept in fast. The house shifted with it. Somewhere above them, a board creaked under weight. Not the settling of an old structure, a step. Atlas shot up instantly, his body rigid. His bark cracked through the house, sharp and explosive. The kind of bark he used when the threat was real, when hesitation meant death. Ryan grabbed the flashlight and swept it across the hallway. Shadows stretched long and thin. He caught his breath as the beam passed the patched wall. The plaster was different. New lines, new texture. He hadn't imagined it. Atlas approached the wall again, nose pressed tight to the seam. He pawed once, not frantic. Exact. Ryan pressed his palm again. This time, he felt a faint vibration beneath the surface, like air moving where no air should move. Someone had sealed something behind this wall, not decades ago, recently, maybe even days. He whispered Atlas's name. The dog didn't look back. His gaze stayed locked on the wall like he was staring through it. Ryan's mind raced. Whoever lived here or hid here had left in a hurry. The warm burner, the clean banister, the lock that moved too smooth. Someone was coming and going in this house long after the county declared it abandoned. He forced himself to breathe. He had seen war zones quieter than this. Then came the sound. Soft, from behind the wall. A scrape, like fingers brushing against wood. Atlas bared his teeth, but didn't bark. His silence was worse. Far worse. He only stayed silent when the danger was close enough to smell. Ryan stepped back as the wall gave a faint thump. Something, or someone, was on the other side. Atlas moved between Ryan and the wall, chest out, ready to strike. The dog didn't flinch. Ryan's voice dropped to a whisper. "Atlas, what do you see?" The shepherd didn't answer, of course. He just stared at the wall, and for the first time since stepping into Briarwood, Ryan felt a flicker of fear. The house wasn't empty, and the thing inside it had waited until dark to move. Atlas took one slow step forward. Ryan tightened his grip on the flashlight. The wall thumped again. Soft, intentional. Atlas growled low, a sound that used to freeze men in their tracks on deployment. Ryan swallowed hard and whispered, almost to himself, "This place cost me 5 cents, but tonight it's going to cost us a whole lot more." Morning came grey and muted, the kind of morning where the world feels like it is waiting for something to happen. Ryan brewed instant coffee on a camp stove, unwilling to trust the house's electrical systems. Atlas sat beside the hallway, staring at the same section of wall from the night before, as if whatever had moved behind it still lingered in the air. Ryan crouched next to him. "You're not letting that go, are you?" Atlas didn't blink. His ears twitched once, then angled toward the wall with almost surgical precision. Ryan leaned closer. The paint was slightly bubbled, the color a shade duller than the rest of the hallway. He pressed a thumb to it and felt the faint give of patched plaster. The wall wasn't old. It was pretending to be. Atlas lifted a paw and placed it gently on the lower right edge, then dragged it up in a clean vertical line. The motion was deliberate, the way he used to signal hidden compartments during building sweeps overseas. He paused, shifted left, and repeated the same exact line, forming a perfect square. Ryan felt a chill crawl up his spine. Someone had hidden something here, and Atlas was treating it like a live threat. He whispered, "What were you trying to tell me last night?" Atlas didn't look at him. He pressed his nose to the upper corner of the square, inhaled sharply, then stepped back with a low rumble deep in his chest. It wasn't fear. It was certainty. Ryan exhaled slowly. "All right, I see it now." He marked the edges with his fingertips. Yes, it was a door once, painted over, sealed. The work was sloppy, the kind done in a hurry or by someone who expected no one to check. The question forming in his mind was heavier than the house itself. If this place was abandoned for decades, who patched a door only a few years ago? He stood, pacing back towards the living room. Atlas followed without being asked, keeping himself half a step ahead, always scanning. Ryan had seen that stance before. Kandahar, Fallujah. The night his unit raided an insurgent compound and found something they weren't meant to see. That same rigid tension radiated now from the dog's body. The house remained still for most of the day. Too still. Every creak felt purposeful. Every draft carried weight. Ryan spent the afternoon checking the rooms upstairs, opening closet after closet that held nothing but stale air and the faint scent of cedar. But the far end of the hallway, the last room on the left, was locked from the inside. Atlas sat outside that door and growled in a low, steady hum. Ryan pressed his ear to the wood. Silence. But it was the kind of silence that feels like someone holding a breath on the other side. He thought about forcing it open, but something in Atlas's posture told him not yet. Night seeped back into the house, filling corners before Ryan even realized the sun had set. He set up his sleeping bag again near the hearth, flashlight and pry bar beside him, and Atlas curled close, but not asleep. The dog's breathing was even, but his eyes didn't close. Around midnight, the temperature dropped in an instant, not gradually, as if the whole house exhaled cold at once. Ryan sat up without knowing why. Then he heard it. A footstep. Light. Directly above them. Atlas stood so fast his nails clicked against the tile. His body blocked Ryan completely, muscles braced, tail stiff as metal. He stared at the ceiling, unmoving, every instinct sharpened to a point. Ryan reached for the flashlight but didn't turn it on. Instead, he listened. Another footfall. Softer this time, but undeniably there. Slow. Pacing. Atlas growled. Not loud, low, controlled, a warning honed by years of training. Ryan whispered his name, but Atlas didn't acknowledge him. His eyes were locked upward like he could see through floors. A sudden sound snapped through the silence. A shift, not a creak, a weight redistribution. Someone was on the second floor, moving towards the staircase. Ryan's pulse hammered in his throat. He grabbed the pry bar and rose to a crouch. The beam of moonlight from the broken window stretched across the tile, cutting a pale line towards the hallway. Atlas stepped into that line, taking position where any threat would appear first. Then came the twist he didn't expect. Something slid across the upstairs floor. Not a footstep, not weight. Something dragged. Slow. Long. The sound folded into the house like it had been waiting years to be heard. Atlas barked, one explosive burst that shattered the air. Ryan whispered, steadying himself. "Show me. Lead." Atlas moved. Not charging. Not reckless. He advanced with the calculated steps of a K9 who had walked into danger 100 times and survived it. He stopped at the base of the stairs and lifted his head, sniffing. Then something happened that punched cold through Ryan's veins. Atlas stepped back. Atlas never retreated unless the threat was real. Real enough that even a war dog hesitated. Ryan swallowed hard. "What is it, boy?" Atlas stared up the steps, then shifted his stance back in front of Ryan, refusing to let him pass. Ryan felt the weight of the moment press against his ribs. The house was bigger than he'd imagined. The secret behind the wall wasn't small, and whatever was upstairs was connected. He took a slow breath, grounding himself. Someone lived here recently. Someone patched that wall, and someone was upstairs last night. Atlas finally looked back at him, eyes burning with a clarity Ryan had only seen on missions that went bad. Instinct didn't just awaken, it was screaming. Ryan tightened his grip on the metal bar. "All right, Atlas. Tomorrow we start tearing this place open." A creak answered him from the darkness above. Atlas's growl deepened, and Ryan knew they weren't alone in the house he'd bought for 5 cents. Ryan worked before the sun rose, driven not by courage but by something colder, sharper. The kind of instinct you learn only after too many nights waiting for danger to show its face. Atlas shadowed him through the hallway, steps silent, breathing steady. When Ryan picked up the crowbar, Atlas sat down exactly 6 feet away, tail stiff, posture locked. He was giving space but not distance. Ryan pressed the tip of the crowbar into the seam Atlas had traced. The plaster cracked faster than he expected. Too fast. As if the wall had been patched only recently, not decades ago. A chunk broke away, exposing wood beneath, darker and older than the rest of the house. Atlas growled, low and certain. Ryan whispered, "All right, here we go." He pulled harder. Plaster collapsed in uneven slabs, dust blooming around them. When the last section fell, a narrow door stood revealed. The frame looked hand-built, the grain of the wood nearly black with age. This wasn't part of the original blueprint he had seen at the county office. Atlas stepped forward, nose pressed to the lower corner of the door. His tail stayed rigid, a warning rod. He didn't bark. He was waiting for Ryan to choose. Ryan tightened his grip on the handle and pulled. The hinges didn't screech. They groaned like an exhale held for 40 years. Cold air poured out, carrying the smell of iron and old paper. A staircase dropped into darkness, steeper than any code-legal stairs, built by someone who needed secrecy, not safety. Atlas looked at Ryan once, then descended first, every step deliberate. A soldier clearing unknown ground again. Ryan followed, flashlight slicing through the stale dark. At the bottom, the beam caught metal. Rows of filing cabinets lined the stone walls, some dented, some pristine. Cardboard boxes towered on shelves, labeled in faded marker. Ryan brushed one with his fingers. Dust clung to his skin. But something felt off. The dust wasn't thick enough for a space untouched since the 80s. Atlas moved to a long wooden table in the center of the room and sat beside it. Not alert. Waiting. Ryan crossed to the table, flashlight trembling slightly in his hand. Inside the first box, he found county property records dating back decades. Names he recognized, names from old Briarwood rumors. Some files bore 2 signatures for a single sale, with different handwriting layered on top. He opened another box. Photographs. Families posing in front of their land. Houses that no longer existed. Faces circled in red ink. Some crossed out entirely. He felt the air thicken. He reached deeper and pulled out a bundle of leather-bound journals. The handwriting inside was hurried, desperate. Notes about land seizures, anonymous tips, threats, dates. One date stopped him. The entry was scribbled on the week his father died. He whispered to himself without thinking. "Dad, what were you doing?" Atlas shifted, ears angling toward the far shelf. He stood abruptly, trotted across the room, and pressed his paws up on a stack of boxes. Something slipped between the cardboard flaps, then dropped to the floor. A torn sheet of paper, edges ragged like it had been ripped in a hurry. Atlas nudged it toward Ryan. Ryan crouched, lifted it carefully. The handwriting was uneven, rushed. 3 words pulled the air out of his lungs. "If they find this place, run!" Ryan stared at the note. The ink was the same faded blue his father used in the journals. His pulse hammered in his ears as he scanned the shelves again. This wasn't just storage. It was a vault, a graveyard of truths someone had tried to bury. Atlas moved to Ryan's side, pressing his shoulder gently into Ryan's arm. A grounding gesture. On deployment, that meant stay focused. Not fear, not panic. Focus. Ryan exhaled and steadied himself. Something clicked overhead. A soft metallic sound, like a latch moving. Atlas froze. Then he spun toward the stairs, ears forward, body dropping into a stance Ryan hadn't seen since their last deployment together. Ready. Silent. Waiting for a threat to present itself. Ryan killed the flashlight. Darkness swallowed them, thick but protective. Another sound echoed from above. A footstep. Subtle. Not the house settling. A person. Atlas edged between Ryan and the stairs, teeth exposed but breath silent. Ryan whispered close to his ear. "Someone else knows about this room." The stair above creaked. Then another, slow, descending. Atlas growled, barely audible but vibrating through Ryan's chest. Ryan tightened his grip on the crowbar, knowing it wouldn't matter much if the wrong person walked through that doorway. But the footsteps didn't continue. They paused. And then something unexpected happened. The basement light flickered on. A single bulb hanging over the table buzzed to life, swinging slightly, as if touched by a hand seconds before. The doorway at the top of the stairs was empty. Atlas stood motionless, staring up at the light. Ryan's breath chilled. No one had turned on the power. He hadn't even checked if it worked. Someone had done it for them. He whispered, "Atlas, stay close." The dog didn't move. He didn't break eye contact with the stairs. Ryan looked at the papers in his hand. The land records, the crossed-out photos, the note from his father. Someone had come back to the house minutes after he broke open the wall. Someone who knew exactly what was hidden here. Someone who wanted to send a message. Atlas let out one soft bark, sharp and decisive. Ryan felt its meaning the way he used to in the desert. Move. Not later. Now. They weren't the only ones who had discovered the basement, but whoever got here first had no intention of letting them walk away with its secrets. Ryan drove east at dawn, the old county road curling through frost-bitten pines. Atlas rode shotgun, head low, ears twitching with the rhythm of the engine. They had barely spoken a word since leaving the house, but Ryan didn't need words to know the dog was on edge. Atlas kept watching the mirrors, the tree line, the horizon. A soldier scanning open ground. They were headed to see the only man Ryan knew who might understand what he found. Elias Ford, a retired county deputy, a friend of his father, and a ghost in Briarwood Law. He lived on the outskirts of town, in a cabin people pretended didn't exist. Some said he lost his mind. Others said he knew too much. When Ryan pulled into the gravel drive, the cabin looked like it had been carved directly from the mountain. Smoke curled from the chimney. A single rocking chair sat on the porch. Elias Ford sat in it, wrapped in a wool coat, watching them long before the truck stopped. Ryan stepped out. "Morning, sir." Elias didn't answer. His eyes drifted past Ryan, settling on Atlas. The dog hopped down from the truck bed and approached slowly, posture neutral but alert. Elias's grip on the armrest tightened. "That's Richard's dog," Elias murmured. Ryan shook his head. "No, but he was trained in the same program." Elias's jaw tensed. Close enough. Inside, the cabin smelled of cedar, tobacco, and something older. Elias motioned for them to sit. Atlas settled beside Ryan, then surprised both men by shifting closer to Elias instead, pressing his shoulder gently against the old man's boot. Elias froze, eyes widening. He senses things. Ryan said quietly. Elias shook his head. No, he remembers things. Ryan laid the file folder on the table. He didn't open it. Elias stared at it anyway, like he already knew what was inside. "Where'd you find that?" he whispered. "Hidden room in my house." Elias flinched at the word house. "You bought that place. 5 cents. Elias rubbed his hands over his face. "God help you." Ryan opened the folder. Land records, photos of families marked with red ink, duplicate signatures, maps, and the torn note Atlas had found. Elias stared at the note for a long time before he whispered, "That handwriting. I'd know it anywhere." Ryan waited. "It's your father's," Elias said, voice cracking. "He warned me he was keeping copies, but I never thought he'd hide them in that place." Ryan's throat tightened. "Tell me what you know." Elias leaned back, breath uneven. In the late 80s, early 90s, Briarwood's land prices shot through the roof. Farms, forests, private tracts reclassified as development zones overnight. But the paperwork was wrong. Too clean. Too fast. Your father and I started digging. At first it was clerical errors, then forged signatures, then families that never received their payments. Or worse, families that disappeared. Atlas lifted his head, ears locking onto Elias's voice. Ryan asked, "What does my house have to do with it?" Elias pointed at the folder. Somebody used that property as a holding site. Records passed through there before they were altered or destroyed. Your father found out, and he died 2 weeks later. Ryan felt the floor tilt. They said it was a heart attack. Elias shook his head slowly. They said a lot of things. Atlas growled, a deep, vibrating warning, turning toward the window. Something outside shifted in the underbrush, faint but real. Elias went still. Ryan reached for the flashlight in his pocket. "Visitors," Elias whispered. "They watch me sometimes." Ryan moved toward the window, but Atlas barked once, sharp, forcing him back. It wasn't fear, it was tactical. Atlas was telling him not to silhouette himself in the window. A second later, a car engine turned over in the trees. Tires spun on leaves. By the time Ryan stepped onto the porch, the vehicle had already vanished down the dirt road. He returned to the table. "Who's running this now?" Elias didn't hesitate. "Raymond Holt." The name landed like a blow. Holt was Briarwood's current mayor, a man with polished speeches, charity events, a smile built for headlines. Ryan let out a harsh breath. "He's involved in this." "Involved," Elias said. "He inherited it. His father started the operation. Raymond just perfected it. And if he knows you've found this, he'll come for it. Or for you." Elias looked at Atlas again. And for him. Atlas flattened his ears, understanding enough to stiffen like a drawn bowstring. Ryan's pulse spiked. Elias continued, "Your father wasn't the only one who tried to fight this, but you're the first one who found the vault, the first one with proof." Ryan closed the folder gently. "So what now?" Elias stared into the fire, the flames reflecting in tired, haunted eyes. "Now you decide whether you finish what Richard started, or you walk away and pretend you never opened that wall." Ryan felt Atlas shift beside him. The dog looked at him, steady and unblinking. No fear, no hesitation, only resolve. Elias saw it too. That dog already made the choice for you. A crack sounded on the porch. Not a footstep, something lighter, a snapped twig. Ryan and Elias turned at the same time. Atlas was already on his feet, staring at the door. Ryan whispered, "Who knows you're alive, Elias?" Elias didn't answer for a long moment. Then his eyes dropped to the torn note. "More people than either of us wants to believe." Atlas growled again, louder this time. The investigation had begun, but they were already being hunted. By the time Ryan turned up the driveway, dusk had folded itself into Briarwood's tree line. The house sat dark and still, too still, the kind of silence that feels arranged rather than natural. Atlas stood in the truck bed, nose lifted, body rigid. He didn't wait for a command. The moment Ryan cut the engine, the dog jumped down, hackles raised. Ryan felt it too. Something was wrong. He approached the back porch carefully, boots crunching softly against gravel. The rear door hung slightly open, just enough for the wind to nudge it back and forth. Ryan never left it like that. He had locked it that morning. He knew he had. Atlas moved ahead, slow and deliberate, positioning himself between the opening and Ryan's path. The shepherd's nostrils flared as he sampled the air, then he gave a single, short huff. A warning. Not danger yet, but close. Ryan exhaled, pushed the door with 2 fingers. It swung wider than expected. Inside, the kitchen was dark, but the smell hit hard. A sharp chemical bite. Gas. Ryan's heart slammed once in his chest. Before he could react, Atlas barked, sharp, explosive, and rammed his body against Ryan's leg, shoving him backward through the doorway and onto the porch. Ryan stumbled as Atlas lunged ahead, teeth bared, herding him away from the house with a force he had only ever used during active alerts overseas. Ryan gasped, breath tearing out of him. "Atlas, what?" Then he saw it. Inside the kitchen, the stove knob was turned fully open, the metal still warm. Someone had walked into his house, twisted the gas on, and left. Atlas circled back to Ryan, panting hard, eyes locked on the open doorway. His body quivered with adrenaline. Ryan knelt, pressing a hand to the dog's shoulder. "You saved us," he whispered. Atlas pushed his head into Ryan's chest, then snapped upright again, ears pivoting toward the dark yard. They moved back toward the tree line cautiously. The gas dissipated behind them, the house sitting quiet but no longer pretending to be empty. Atlas lowered his nose to the ground and began tracking, weaving back and forth with methodical intent. The dog picked up a scent near the far corner of the house and barked once. Ryan followed him to a patch of disturbed dirt, a boot print, deep, fresh. Atlas moved faster now, leading Ryan across the yard towards the woods. The trail cut through fallen leaves in a straight line, too straight to be an animal. The intruder had run. Hard. Atlas followed the scent deep into the trees, Ryan close behind, flashlight beam slicing through the dark. The forest breathed around them. Twigs snapped under their feet. A cold wind carried the sharp smell of pine and something else. Sweat. Human. They were close. Then, as abruptly as it began, the trail stopped. Atlas froze at the base of a large oak, sniffed the bark, then circled. His tail stiffened. He looked left, then right, then back at Ryan. Confusion was rare for the dog, but this wasn't confusion. It was something worse. The trail didn't fade. It vanished. Ryan swept the light across the ground. The boot prints ended at a patch of flattened leaves, no continuing trail, no footprints leading away. It was as if the intruder had been lifted off the ground. Atlas growled, low and hot. He pawed once at the base of the tree, then sat, staring at the woods as if daring them to move. Ryan felt the hairs rise on the back of his neck. Someone had been here, someone fast, someone careful, someone who knew how to erase their tracks. He crouched beside Atlas. "You saw him, didn't you?" Atlas didn't blink. Ryan stood slowly, scanning the forest. Whoever had entered the house knew exactly what they were doing. They had used gas, subtle and deadly, and timed it for his return. That wasn't meant to scare him away. That was meant to kill him. He felt the air shift behind him, and his pulse spiked. For a moment he thought someone was there, watching from the shadows, but it was only the wind moving through the branches. Only nature, but not peace. Never peace. They walked back towards the house, Atlas glued to his side, checking the darkness with every step. Ryan didn't go inside. He couldn't trust anything in there now. Every window looked wrong. Every corner felt compromised. He sat on the porch steps, breathing cold air, letting the adrenaline burn off. Atlas stood 2 feet away, posture rigid, scanning the tree line. He wasn't pacing. He wasn't restless. He was guarding, ready to act. Ryan whispered, "Someone came after us. Someone who knows what's in that vault." Atlas's ears flicked. Ryan looked at the house, its dark windows reflecting the last light of dusk like unblinking eyes. "They want us gone," he said, "or dead." Atlas let out a small, deliberate sound. Not a bark, not a whine. Something between the two. Agreement. Ryan placed a hand on the dog's back, feeling the tension coiled beneath his coat. "We're not running." Atlas didn't move, didn't need to. The message was clear, they were in a fight now, and Atlas had already chosen his side. Elias Ford never missed a meeting. He never cancelled, never showed up late, never changed plans without warning. So when he didn't answer Ryan's calls that afternoon, a knot formed in Ryan's gut and pulled tight. Atlas felt it too. The dog paced the cabin, restless, stopping only to stare at the front door as if something out there was waiting. By dusk, Ryan couldn't sit still. He grabbed his keys. Atlas was already at the truck before the engine turned. They drove toward Elias's mountain cabin, a winding road carved between pine trees and jagged slopes. Halfway there, Atlas suddenly stood on all fours, nose pressed to the window seam, tail stiff. Then he barked once. Sharp. Urgent. Ryan slowed the truck. "What do you got?" Atlas stared toward a cluster of pine trees just off the road. Ryan stepped out, boots crunching lightly against the gravel. Atlas trotted ahead, sniffing the ground, then circling tightly around a fallen branch. He stopped at a thick pine trunk, nose pressed against the bark. Ryan saw it a second later, a smear of dark red. Fresh, his chest tightened. Elias. Atlas growled low, not at the blood but at the ground nearby. He was tracking something. Someone. The dog took off into the brush with purpose, weaving between trees, never hesitating. Ryan followed close, heart pounding. The scent trail led them downhill toward a clearing where an old storage barn sagged under decades of rot. The place looked forgotten, but the tire tracks leading inside said otherwise. Atlas slowed at the door, body low, ears pinned, his silent warning. Danger. Inside, a single bulb flickered weakly, casting long shadows across stacks of crates and rusted equipment. The smell of oil and damp wood mixed with something worse. Fear. Then Ryan saw him. Elias sat tied to a metal chair at the center of the barn. His face bruised, shirt torn, breathing shallow. Standing beside him, sleeves rolled and posture coiled with authority, was Raymond Holt. Ryan stepped forward before he could stop himself. Holt turned. "I wondered how long it would take you." His voice was too calm. Ryan's fists clenched. "What did you do to him?" Holt tapped a pen against a single sheet of paper lying on the table beside Elias. "A confession. He signs this and the investigation ends. No trial, no questions. The past stays buried." Elias groaned, barely lifting his head. "Don't listen to him." Holt's expression hardened. Then he looked at Atlas. "Or your dog won't leave this place breathing." Atlas didn't growl. He didn't bark. He simply stepped in front of Ryan, shoulder rigid, gaze fixed on Holt with soldier-like precision. Ryan had seen that stance before. Kandahar, night patrol, seconds before a breach. He felt cold clarity wash through him. Holt wasn't bluffing. This man had already killed to protect his secrets. Suddenly, Atlas stopped staring at Holt and tilted his head. Just slightly, toward the floor. Ryan followed his gaze. The boards near Holt's boots looked different. One plank slightly warped, edges cleaner than the rest. Atlas moved a paw forward and pressed lightly. The wood flexed. A trapdoor. Ryan's pulse kicked. Atlas had found them a way out, a way Holt hadn't expected. Holt took a step forward. "I'll give you one chance, Walker. Walk away. Take your mutt with you. Forget the files. Forget Elias. Forget everything." Atlas barked once, not at Holt, at Ryan. "Move!" Ryan didn't hesitate. He lunged for Elias just as Atlas charged toward the far wall, barking with violent force to draw attention. Holt flinched, turning his body away for half a second. That was enough. Ryan yanked the chair backward, dragging Elias with him. Atlas pivoted and slammed his weight into the loose section of flooring. The board cracked, then split, then gave way entirely. Ryan pulled Elias toward the opening just as Holt reached for his weapon. Atlas jumped first, disappearing into darkness. Ryan pushed Elias into the hole, swung his legs over the edge, and dropped. Gunfire roared above them. The tunnel they fell into was narrow, musty, built of old lumber beams and stone. Air thick with dust. Atlas landed first, spun, and positioned himself between Ryan and the ladder as boots thudded overhead. He didn't wait. He took off down the tunnel, guiding them with the sure instinct of a dog trained to work in darkness. Ryan lifted Elias's arm over his shoulder, supporting his weight. "You still with me?" barely. They ran. The tunnel shook as someone dropped into the shaft behind them. Atlas accelerated. He growled once, warning them to move faster. They broke into a wider chamber where boxes lay stacked from floor to ceiling. The place must have been part of a wartime supply network, a forgotten route carved beneath the hills. Atlas didn't stop to sniff. He veered left, then right, navigating blind turns like he'd memorized them. Behind them, footsteps approached. Fast. Ryan heard breath. A man's, close. Atlas suddenly skidded to a stop at a narrow turn, teeth bared. A figure lunged from the shadows, armed with a pipe. Atlas launched upward, jaws locking onto the attacker's arm as the man screamed. The impact knocked the man backward into the wall. Atlas refused to let go. Ryan dragged Elias forward. Atlas held the attacker long enough for Ryan to see the man's face. Not Holt, one of his enforcers. The man swung wildly and struck Atlas's shoulder. The dog yelped, but his grip never loosened. Ryan stepped forward and slammed his fist into the attacker's jaw. The man collapsed. Atlas finally released and limped back to Ryan's side, breathing hard but still standing. Good boy. Ryan knelt, checking his shoulder. Blood stained the fur, but the wound wasn't deep. Atlas nudged his face against Ryan's chin, urging him to move. Voices echoed down the tunnel. They took off again, Elias stumbling but determined. Atlas led them around another corner until a sliver of daylight appeared ahead. A grate. An exit. Ryan shoved Elias toward the opening and pushed hard. The old metal groaned, then popped out of place. Elias crawled out into the cold night air. Ryan followed. Atlas was last out. He shot one look back into the tunnel, ensuring no one was behind them, and then leapt through. Ryan replaced the grate, shoving debris over it as Atlas pressed his body against Ryan's leg, trembling with adrenaline and pain, but still alert. Elias collapsed onto the ground. Breathing hard, Ryan looked back towards the horizon. The barn sat half a mile away, silhouettes moving inside. Holt wasn't finished, but neither were they. Atlas lifted his head, eyes burning with the fierce, loyal certainty of a soldier who had chosen his war. Ryan placed a hand on his neck. We fight back. Tomorrow. Atlas's tail moved once. Agreement. By the time dawn bled across the hills, Ryan knew he couldn't run this alone anymore. Elias was battered but awake, his eyes sharp with the kind of clarity a man gains only when he knows the truth has finally found daylight. And Atlas, though limping slightly, patrolled the perimeter of the cabin with the same relentless vigilance he carried in war. His shoulder was swollen, but he never once whined. They needed someone who could move quietly, someone Holt would never suspect, someone who had nothing left to lose. That led them to the small chapel on the edge of Briarwood County, tucked between two cedar groves. Father Gabriel Caldwell had served the town for 30 years, long enough to see families lose everything when land was stripped away under suspicious paperwork. He was the kind of man people whispered secrets to when there was nowhere else to put them. Ryan parked the truck near the back. Atlas jumped down first, scanning the empty parking lot. The chapel doors were open. Light flickered from inside. Gabriel was already at the altar, hands clasped, as if he had been expecting them. "You're hurt," Gabriel said, looking at Elias first, then at Atlas. "And you've brought trouble with you." Ryan placed the thick folder on the pew. "We brought evidence, and not just ours." Gabriel's eyes softened with something like grief. He walked to a side table, opened a locked drawer, and pulled out a worn leather box. Inside were documents so old the edges had yellowed, but the signatures were unmistakable. Families who had begged for help when Holt's land committee began relocating entire neighborhoods. People no one listened to, until now. "These were entrusted to me years ago," Gabriel whispered. "They believed someone would come one day. Someone brave enough to reopen the wound. I suppose that someone is you. Atlas stepped forward and nudged the box with his nose. Gabriel smiled faintly. Even he senses the weight of this. Ryan gathered all the files, stacking them together with the pages he and Elias had uncovered in the hidden basement. Gabriel hesitated only a moment before walking to a back room and returning with a burner phone. "You can't take this to the county," he said. "The corruption runs deeper than the mayor. But there is one person who might listen. Nora Blake." Ryan had heard the name. Everyone had. She was the investigative journalist who once exposed a land theft ring in Missouri that ended with 3 officials indicted and 1 resigning. Nora didn't chase headlines. She chased truth. Gabriel dialed. She answered on the second ring. "You're calling earlier than usual, Father." Her voice was steady, like someone who had been awake for hours. Gabriel handed the phone to Ryan. He swallowed. "Ms. Blake, I have something you need to see." There was a pause, then a measured question. "Does it come with danger attached?" Ryan looked down. Atlas was sitting perfectly still, watching the doorway like he expected someone to burst through it. "Yes," he said, "a lot of it." "Good," Nora replied. "Text me the location." She arrived before the hour was up, pulling her SUV behind the chapel in a tight turn. One look at Elias's injuries told her everything Ryan didn't say. She spread the documents across the wooden pews, flipping page after page, mouth tightening, eyes narrowing. "This is enough for federal involvement," she said quietly, "and for a prison sentence." Atlas stayed at her heel the entire time, occasionally sniffing a file or nudging a page that slid too close to the edge. Nora looked at him more than once. "He's reading the room better than most humans I know." Ryan exhaled. "He's been doing that his whole life." Nora withdrew a small recorder. "I need your statements. Both of you. Especially what happened in the barn." Elias nodded. His voice shook, but his words were steady. "Holt has been doing this for decades, and he's not working alone." Nora finished recording, then closed her notebook. "I'm sending this to the FBI task force in Knoxville. They owe me a favor, and they're going to want this." The next hour moved like a storm building strength. Nora clicked through encrypted channels. Gabriel scanned the parking lot. Ryan sat by the door, gripping the hilt of his knife even when his hands trembled. Atlas lay beside him, eyes locked on the windows, breathing slow and measured. Then the call came. "We're inbound. 20 minutes. Ryan didn't realize how tightly he'd been holding his breath until it finally escaped his chest. When the FBI arrived, they came in quietly. Unmarked vehicles rolling through the chapel's back entrance. Agents stepped inside without ceremony. They took the files, photographed everything, listened to Elias recount the threats. They spoke with Nora about Holt's network, about missing records, about Atlas discovering the hidden basement at the mansion. Then they asked the question that made the entire chapel go silent. "Where is Holt now?" Ryan looked at Atlas. The dog stood. No command, just instinct. He lifted his nose to the air. He knew. 2 hours later, agents stormed Holt's office. The mayor tried to escape through a service corridor, but an agent caught him behind the stairwell, sweating and shaking. The charges read aloud to him echoed down the hallway. Extortion, fraud, land theft, kidnapping, attempted murder, conspiracy against the county. When they escorted Holt out in cuffs, the townspeople watched in stunned silence. Some cried, some clapped, some simply stood in the cold, hands in their pockets, like they were witnessing the end of a long nightmare. Nora recorded the arrest. Gabriel prayed under his breath. Elias leaned against the hood of Ryan's truck, chest rising with relief he hadn't felt in years. And Atlas? Atlas sat directly at Ryan's feet, neck stretched high, ears perked, tail sweeping once across the ground. He didn't bark, didn't snarl, didn't move. He simply watched Holt being driven away, the weight of justice finally shifting. Ryan placed a hand on Atlas's back. The dog leaned into it, steady, loyal, unbroken. "You did this," Ryan whispered. "All of it." Atlas closed his eyes for a moment, a soldier's acknowledgement. Justice had been lit. But their story wasn't finished yet. Briarwood County didn't change overnight, but it changed fast enough that people noticed. For the first time in decades, the courthouse lights stayed on past sunset, for reasons that had nothing to do with cover-ups. Filing cabinets were opened, locked drawers were forced, maps that had collected dust since the 90s were pinned to new bulletin boards under federal supervision. And the most unexpected part came from the townspeople themselves. They arrived one by one, sometimes with their heads down, as if ashamed they hadn't spoken sooner. Old farmers carrying envelopes sealed with tape yellowed by time. Widows clutching handwritten letters from husbands long gone. Families holding brittle deeds, eviction notices, or photos of land that disappeared from the county records. They came to Ryan. Or rather, they came to Atlas. The dog sat on the porch of the mansion, Ryan's 5-cent miracle, and greeted every visitor with a quiet, steady presence. No barking, no posturing, just the calm of an old soldier who'd seen enough lies to recognize the truth when it finally arrived. People trusted him instantly, and because they trusted him, they trusted Ryan. By late October, the dining room table couldn't hold another sheet of paper. Ryan cleared out the basement, the same hidden room he and Atlas had discovered, and rebuilt it from the ground up. New lights, reinforced shelves, fireproof boxes lining every wall. He called it the truth room. Every file, every record, every story that Holt's network buried now had a home. A safe one, a loud one. Atlas followed him down the stairs each morning, even though his gait was slower now. The wound on his shoulder healed, but it left a stiffness that hadn't been there before. Age had crept into his movements, softening his leaps, slowing his sprints. Some mornings he took the stairs one at a time, pausing halfway like he needed a breath. Ryan pretended not to notice, but he always walked behind him just in case. Inside the basement, Atlas would make one slow lap around the room, sniff each box as if counting them, then settle in his spot by the door. Guarding, watching, claiming the space as his own. "You don't have to stay here all day," Ryan told him once. Atlas blinked slowly, unimpressed. It wasn't a hallway anymore. It wasn't a hiding place. It was a vault of voices that had finally found daylight. And Atlas guarded it with the same instinct he once used to guard soldiers in desert outposts. He took the role personally, and nothing Ryan said could break that vow. Outside the mansion, life began returning to normal, though normal meant something different now. Neighbors waved again. Kids rode their bikes past the property without parents pulling them back. The town, once suffocated by fear, breathed differently. Sharper, cleaner, freer. But not all remnants of the past faded. Twice, Ryan found unmarked cars idling near the road. Federal agents watching over the investigation from a distance. One afternoon, a sedan slowed as Ryan repaired the porch railing. The window rolled down just enough for a voice to call out. "You did good work, Walker." Then the car drove off. Ryan didn't know if that was reassurance or a warning. Maybe both. Atlas, lying under the porch steps, lifted his head at the sound of the engine and huffed softly. His hearing wasn't what it used to be, but his instincts never dulled. If anything, they sharpened, as if the dog knew the war wasn't fully over. Ryan finished tightening the bolt and sat beside him. Atlas shifted, placing his chin on Ryan's boot, a habit formed in Afghanistan and carried across continents. Ryan rubbed behind his ears, feeling the patch of white fur that hadn't been there a year earlier. "Getting old on me, huh?" Atlas gave a slow wag. He wasn't done yet. Not by a long shot. At night, the mansion settled into a peaceful quiet Ryan had never imagined possible. The floors still creaked with the same old sounds, but they no longer felt like threats. The shadows no longer hid footsteps. The walls no longer held secrets. Atlas slept by the front door, body curled but ears alert enough to twitch at every rustle of the wind. Sometimes Ryan woke to find him watching the forest through the window. No growl, no bark, just watching. As if waiting for something he couldn't name. Maybe he knew the county still had ghosts hiding in its corners. Maybe he just didn't trust quiet yet. Ryan couldn't blame him. He didn't trust it either. One evening, as Ryan sorted through the last stack of documents in the truth room, Atlas rose slowly and padded over. He nudged a particular box with his nose. "What is it?" Inside were maps of briarwood from 40 years ago, roots that didn't exist anymore, lines drawn by men who weren't alive now to explain them. Ryan frowned. "You want me to look at these?" Atlas nudged it again. Ryan pulled out a map. A road was circled. Not one he visited before. Not one the FBI mentioned. He felt a chill walk up his spine. Another loose thread. Another secret. Atlas sat back on his haunches, eyes calm but insistent. "You're not letting me retire either, huh?" Atlas's tail tapped the floor once. Outside the wind shifted, carrying the scent of pine and early winter. The storm had passed. But storms were funny things in Briarwood. They left roots torn, soil overturned. And sometimes what was buried didn't stay buried. Ryan folded the map and placed it on the table. "All right, partner. Tomorrow." Atlas lay beside him, one paw touching Ryan's boot, as steady as he had been from the first day Ryan brought him home. Quiet had returned to Briarwood County. But for the first time in decades, quiet didn't mean fear. It meant the truth finally had a place to live. The knock came just after noon, soft but confident, like whoever stood outside had rehearsed it. Ryan wiped dust from his hands and climbed the basement stairs. Atlas was already at the door, tail not wagging, but lifted just enough to show curiosity instead of concern. The old dog's hearing wasn't what it used to be, but he sensed visitors before they made a sound. He always had. When Ryan opened the door, he found 3 teenagers standing on the porch, backpacks slung low, notebooks in hand. Their teacher waited by the gate, giving a polite wave before stepping back to let them lead. The girl in front spoke first. "Hi, sir. I'm Maddie Carter. We're doing a project for school. It's about the real history of Briarwood. The stuff people didn't talk about. They said you were the one to ask." Atlas stepped forward, nose twitching. He sniffed her shoes, circled her once, then sat beside her like he had been assigned to her personally. Maddie grinned, tension melting from her shoulders. "He likes you," Ryan said, surprised at how easily Atlas accepted her. They followed him into the foyer, then to the living room where the old stone fireplace threw weak light across the floors. The mansion still carried chilled corners and quiet pockets of memory, but since the town purge, its silence felt earned instead of haunting. Maddie pulled out her notebook. "So, we heard Atlas found something no one else ever would have, something behind a wall." Ryan sat across from her, elbows resting on his knees. He wasn't a man easily caught off guard, but the way she asked it, without fear, without hesitation, struck him. What exactly did you hear? That he's the one who started everything? That if he hadn't barked or dug or whatever he did, none of this would have come out? Is that true? Ryan inhaled slowly. Atlas, lying a few feet away, lifted his head. His muzzle was whiter than ever, fur thinning around the edges, but his eyes were as sharp as the first day Ryan had worked with him in the field. "You could say that," Ryan answered. But Maddie shook her head, tapping her pencil against her notebook. No, I mean, do you think he understood? Like, really understood how important it was? The room went quiet. Outside, the wind moved through the trees like a whisper of old stories still drifting through town. Ryan looked at Atlas, who was now watching him with a calmness that bordered on knowing. The dog didn't move, didn't blink, just held his gaze, steady and patient. Ryan leaned back slowly, letting the weight of the question settle. Most dogs. They react to noise or fear or routine. But Atlas wasn't like most dogs. He never has been. Back when I worked rescue ops, he didn't just follow orders, he made decisions. Smart ones. Ones that saved people. Maddie listened like every word carried a pulse. But that night, Ryan continued, that night in this house, he didn't bark because he heard something. He barked because something was wrong, something hidden, something that wanted to stay hidden. Maddie's eyes softened. So he did know. Ryan nodded. Maybe not the way we understand things, but he knew it mattered. He knew we weren't supposed to walk away from it. One of the boys asked, "Did he ever get scared?" Ryan smiled. Sure, every hero gets scared. Difference is, Atlas ran toward the thing that scared him. Every time. Maddie glanced at the basement door. Is that the room? The one where all the evidence is? The truth room, Ryan said. She folded her hands, suddenly shy. Could we see it? Ryan almost said no. It wasn't a museum. It wasn't a tourist stop. But as he watched Atlas push himself up, slowly but determined, and walk to the basement door as if guiding them, he felt something ease inside him. Yeah, he said quietly. You can see it. He switched on the lights. The kids stepped inside with a reverence that surprised him. They traced the edges of maps pinned to the walls. They whispered over letters from decades ago. They pointed to the timeline chart Hannah Blake had drawn across the whiteboard. Maddie stopped in front of a photograph. Ryan's father outside the old courthouse, standing beside a German shepherd that looked uncannily like Atlas. Is that him? She whispered. No, Ryan said softly. That was Rex, my father's partner, long before Atlas. She glanced at Atlas, sitting beside her with the slow patience of age. So Atlas, he's kind of like the last piece of the story, the part that fixed everything. Ryan felt his throat tighten unexpectedly. He didn't fix everything, but he opened the door, literally. And once he did, everything that was buried had a chance to breathe again. Maddie nodded as if she understood more than most adults ever had. She knelt beside Atlas and touched the side of his face gently. The dog leaned into her hand without hesitation. Maddie swallowed, then asked the question that froze Ryan in place. What's going to happen when he... when he gets too old to keep watching the house? Ryan didn't answer at first. Atlas blinked slowly, nudging Maddie's hand, then looked back at Ryan, lifting his chin with a quiet stubbornness that seemed to say, Not yet. Not today. Ryan cleared his throat. When that time comes, he said, we'll still have the truth he protected. And that doesn't fade, not even when we do. Maddie wrote something down, closed her notebook gently, and stood. She turned one last time toward Atlas. Thank you for finding the wall, she whispered, for not giving up. Atlas lowered his head, and for a moment, just a moment, he looked younger, proud, resolute. The kids left, their teacher thanking Ryan from the gate. Ryan watched them walk away until they disappeared down the dirt road. Inside, Atlas lay on the porch, paws crossed, eyes trained on the tree line like always. Old bones, tired muscles, but the vigilance of a lifetime still burning behind his gaze. Ryan sat beside him. They're going to tell your story, you know. Atlas didn't look away from the woods. Ryan rested a hand gently on his back. And they should. Because none of this would have happened without you. Atlas finally looked at him. Not a bark, not a whine, just a silent understanding, a legacy, living, breathing, watching, still guarding. Late afternoon draped itself across Briarwood in long, warm streaks of gold, the kind of light that made the old mansion look alive again, instead of forgotten. Ryan sat on the rebuilt porch steps, boots planted on the wood he'd sanded himself. Beside him, Atlas lay stretched out, muzzle resting on Ryan's knee, chest rising and falling in an easy rhythm. Age had settled into the dog's bones, but not into his spirit. Maddie stood a few feet away, her phone held up awkwardly like she wasn't sure she had the right to film this moment. She had asked for one last question before finishing her school project. Ryan agreed, mostly because Atlas seemed to like her, and Atlas did not like easily. The girl glanced at her notes, then at the dog, then back to Ryan. When she spoke, her voice carried more steadiness than her hands. So, last thing, if you had to sum up everything Atlas did, everything he found, what would you say? Did he know how big it was? Ryan looked down at Atlas. The dog raised his head slowly, as if aware the question was meant for him too. A soft breeze lifted the fur along his neck. His eyes stayed locked on Ryan's, waiting. Ryan let out a slow breath. He never looked for danger. He said quietly. He looked for the truth. Even when I didn't, Atlas pushed his chin into Ryan's palm, a gesture both gentle and certain. Maddie swallowed, lifting her phone a little higher. Ryan gave the dog's head one long, deliberate stroke. Then he added, he didn't break down walls for adventure or instinct. He did it because somebody had to, and because he refused to walk away when something was wrong. Atlas's ears flicked once, then he gave a single bark. Sharp, soft, final, like punctuation at the end of a sentence that had taken decades to write. Maddie jumped slightly, then laughed under her breath. That's perfect, she whispered. Ryan looked directly into her phone's camera. If you've ever had a dog who didn't just stand by you, but stood for you, he said, voice low, steady, American to the bone, then you know what this feels like. The camera lowered a little as Maddie leaned forward, unsure if he was done. But Ryan wasn't looking at her anymore. His gaze held the lens like he was talking to someone miles away. So I'll ask you what she asked me. He continued. What's your story with a loyal pet? Atlas shifted, resting a paw on Ryan's boot, claiming the moment as much as sharing it. The sun caught his eyes, lighting them with the same fire he'd shown the night he tore through a hidden wall and uncovered the truth that changed an entire county. Maddie ended the recording with a soft thank you and stepped away to pack up her things. Ryan stayed on the porch, hand still in Atlas's fur, watching the girl walk down the path. When she disappeared beyond the gate, the world fell quiet again. Not the kind of quiet that used to haunt this place. Not the kind born from fear or secrets. A different kind. The kind that arrives after storms and trials and long nights in tunnels beneath forgotten barns. The kind earned only by those who survived it all. Atlas lifted his head, scanning the tree line like he had every day of his life. Ryan almost smiled. Still watching, he murmured. The dog didn't move, didn't blink, just stayed fixed on the horizon, listening to whatever the world whispered next. Ryan leaned back on his palms. You know, I think they're going to remember you longer than they remember me. Atlas's tail thumped once, slow and sure. And maybe that was fitting, because every truth that surfaced in Briarwood, every document uncovered, every family vindicated, every corrupt official brought into the light had begun with a single bark from a dog who refused to ignore what others pretended not to see. Ryan stood, joints cracking softly, and Atlas rose beside him. They walked into the house together, the door closing behind them with a familiar, comforting click. As the last light of day slipped behind the ridge, the camera lens Maddie had left running captured the empty porch, the quiet yard, and the forest beyond. But if you listened closely, really closely, you could hear it. A soft exhale, a patient watchfulness, a guardian's presence, still watching, still guarding, always. If you've ever had a dog like Atlas, one who protected you, guided you, or changed your life in ways no human ever could share your story, this channel was built for voices like yours. And if you want more stories of courage, redemption, and the unbreakable bond between humans and their four-legged heroes, make sure to subscribe to the German Shepherd Project, because loyalty like this deserves to be told, every single time.